Hello everybody, this is Michael with 4G Woodcrafts again on the BobsCNC Evolution 4 build. This video is going to cover the assembly of the Carriage assembly. So I will go ahead and get into it. I've got all my parts laid out already and put together. My little bin of small parts. I've got some washers here. I've got a stepper motor, which I did order off of Amazon. I will put a link in the description, and I will go ahead and add a link to all the parts I ordered on Amazon to my initial video for this channel. And I will add them to each video as I use the parts too, so it's easily available for you to find out what I used in that video. Alright, so I will go ahead and get started. First part is to attach the belt retainer, which is this piece right here. And you got to make sure, so if you're looking, these marks on this board are for adjusting it after you are done with the assembly, adjusting it and tightening the bearings onto the rods. So you always need to make sure you have this on the right side. So if you see the marks on the top, this goes on the back. And it goes in between here. And that's attached with 4 M4 screws with the M4 locking nuts. So no need to put Loctite on these because they're going into locking nuts. Alright, so to tighten these nuts and bolts on this part of it, these locking nuts, the M4 locking nuts are either a 7.5 millimeter wrench or a 9/32 wrench, which is what I'm using. You can use a crescent wrench also if you have a small crescent wrench, whatever you have available, just to hold on to it to tighten it down. Okay, next we'll be attaching the SG20 bearings to this assembly, which I did order extra bearings for this build from BobsCNC. They had them in stock, so I went ahead and ordered them. I know there's different places online you can get them, but I went ahead and ordered them from Bob when he had them in stock. Alright, so you got to make sure you put them in the correct order. Now the upper ones do not have the eccentric adjusters, but the bottom ones do. So we'll go ahead and start with the top ones. And so you have the bearing, and there's like a little tab right here on that sticks out a little bit further. That is the part that's going to go towards the assembly. So when you grab your machine screw, you put it on the side that is flat. And then after you do that, you will put the bearing washer on, right? And then it goes through the hole, and make sure it's on the side with the belt retainer. And then you flip it over while holding. So then you add another bearing washer, and then you have the locking nut that goes on that. So this locking nut is 10 millimeters. So the best way I have found to go about doing this is you hold it with the 10 millimeter and just use a screwdriver and go on the other side. Get it nice and snug, and we're good on that one. So the other side, of course, we'll start with another bearing. Put the machine screw in, have the bearing, you put a washer, put it into the board, flip it over, put another washer, and your locking nut. Alright, so the SG20 bearings on the bottom of the Y carriage is a little bit different. I didn't go over it in detail when I put the Z carriage together, but I'll go over it in more detail here. So you still start with the machine screw and the bearing in the same way. You put the machine screw on the flat side with the tab on the other side. Now, the different part is the other side of this. So you still have your washer that you put on there, and once you put it through the hole on the other side, this is where you put your what is it called? Eccentric washer, and then your eccentric adjustment spacer. So you put the washer on like that, and you'll see it's on there loose, and that's intentional for the way this works. So sorry, I've got that in the wrong hole. So it goes on this one. Make sure it's going through the hole with the lines on there. So you have this eccentric washer that's, you know, bigger than the hole, so it's loose. But once you put this spacer in there, it keeps everything tight. It has to go down into the hole of the wood. And that's what's going to allow you to adjust it onto the bars later on in this video. After you do that, you add the locking nut on there. And just so you know, the eccentric, I haven't adjusted them because I haven't gotten to that step yet, but they use a 13mm socket to adjust them. Alright. For the spacer. And go ahead, and I didn't see it in this step of the procedure, but I'm going to do the same thing so I know where it is mark it with a Sharpie on the portion where it's the closest, where you're actually adjusting it from. I'll go ahead and do that on the other one too. So the way you do that, the way you mark it is where you have the hole, the point where the hole is the closest to is what the part you want to mark. With the marker so you know which one you're adjusting with. Alright, we'll get started on the last bearing here. Got this, got the washer, goes in through the back. You have your eccentric washer, your adjustment spacer, and your locking nut. I don't know if it's necessary or not, but this is what I've been doing, is I adjust it to where it's pointing all the way out, which means it's the furthest away from the bars. It's going to make it easier to slide on, and then once you have it on, you'll be able to adjust it as necessary. All right, moving on, and I'm following the procedure in Bob's guide that you can download off of the website. Alright, next part is the carriage bottom support, which is the Y8, and it looks like this. So this is the Y carriage support. You're going to attach it with 2 screws. So looks like it goes on the side away from the bearings. The opposite side of the bearings. One thing I have found is sometimes these are a really tight fit and you have to squeeze. Now if you can't quite get it in there, one thing I've done is you take a clamp and very gently just push it in there. If it's not going, you don't get it started like this, but once you have it in there, if you just need to snug it in a little bit, you can use a clamp like that. Just very gently push it in and it helps it go in there nice and smooth. Alright, so with this, we're going to use the M4 nuts. You can use a magnet if you want. One thing I like to do is, if it's flat like this and easy to get in there, it seems to be faster just to put it in by hand. But if it's a tricky place to hold it, that's when I use the magnet to hold it, right? So you get your screw, dip it in a Loctite. Always remember your Loctite. Put that in there. Grab your screwdriver. And then we're going to attach one of the rail supports, which are these. Now, once we put the bars in there, I'll go over it a little bit more, the safety with it. I know on my E4 when I assembled it, I tried to initially snap them in there, which these are more than half a circle, so you can't snap the bar in there, it'll break the wood. Luckily, I know in the E4 he provided extras. I guess that was a common thing that was happening, but I'll show you how to put the bars in once we get to that step. And we're going to use 3 screws for this because it's got the 3 different holes. And one thing I do sometimes is when you have multiple ones like this, I'll start the screw, go to the next one, and just so the screw doesn't fall out. But what you can do is, like this one, you got 3, start the first one, start the second one, just get it in there where it just engages with the nut. And then what you can do is go back with a screwdriver. It just saves a little bit of time, especially when you get in the big parts with a lot of the screws. If you just start a bunch of them at one time, and you go through and just tighten them all at the same time like this. Again, you've got 3 of the nuts and 3 of the screws. So again, you can use the magnet this step. For me, it seems like it's just a little bit easier to not use the magnet at this point because they're easy to get through. So what I do is I just put my thumb under the hole and kind of put the nut on top, drops it in, and it's easy to hold. There's several situations where it's not easy to hold, it's not in a good position, and you'll definitely want to use a magnet at that point. It's just with these the way they are, it's a lot easier to just hold it for now. Not necessarily easier, but it is a lot faster. Alright, so we've got both of those Y supports on there. And then we need the rail top assembly, which is this piece right here. And that's going to be attached with 2 screws. That one fits perfectly in there. Most of these, Bob does a great job of getting the size right on these. Almost everything fits perfect. So they've definitely got this down to a science. Now we need to attach the Z rail stop. So what that is this piece. And what this does is you put it on the bottom, and that's what's going to prevent the rails from falling out of the bottom. So that's what holds it in place. And that's going to be with 2 of the machine screws and 2 of the lock nuts. So we need the M4x16 machine screws, the regular ones, but then for these, you're going to want to use the lock nuts, which I have right here. So I need 2 of them. A lot of the ones that are specialized, what I do is I cut a little corner in the bag so I can get them when I need, but that way, since they have the labels on them, they're a lot easier to get. And it looks like they have the screws going from the bottom in the diagram with the nuts on top. I'm not sure if it really matters. It shouldn't. Understanding the design behind it, I don't think it matters, but the picture shows the screws, the bolts coming from the bottom with the nuts on top. Once you do that, I'm using a 9/32 wrench. You can use a crescent wrench, or I believe it's a 7.5 millimeter if you happen to have one. Alright, so next are the Y supports. So the way the Y supports go is the thicker part, the wider part, goes at the top of the carriage assembly, and the one with the small curve on the bottom goes on the bottom. So, and it fits on there kind of like a puzzle. All the pieces line up, and I didn't have any major issues or anything with any of these on the E4, so I don't imagine I'll have any fitment issues on this one either. Like I said, everything is a snug fit, but it lines up perfectly. Alright, and this one you're going to use 7 of the screws and nuts. So again, I just feel like the first one, I look at it each time I'm going to put a screw in, and if I can easily get to where the nut goes, then I will just go ahead and hold it. And what I do is each time I put like a few in one side, I'll go ahead and tighten them up so I don't miss them or forget about them later. I don't usually put too many in without going ahead and tighten them up. So that was 3. It says 7, so I've got 4 more to go. And if you look, they're all 4 of them are right here. So just hold my thumb under the hole. So as you can see, I'm holding my thumb under the hole, and then I drop the nut in the top, get some Loctite on the screw, put it in the side, and just engage the nut. That's all you gotta do. Same thing for the next one. See, now this one is a little trickier to get my fingers in, so I'm gonna go ahead and use a magnet for that one. All I do is hold it in place with the magnet, get my screw, Loctite, put it in the side hole. With the magnet on there, it automatically attracts it, but just go ahead and get it started. Do the same thing for this other middle one. Again, each situation is a little different on how you can get to the screws or the nuts, on whether you want to use a magnet or just hold it with your fingers. I guarantee you, if you try to just hold it with your fingers with all of them, it will take you a lot longer. Using a magnet to hold it in place is very, it makes it a lot easier, a lot quicker for the whole process. Alright, so that's the last one of this part. Go ahead and tighten them all up. imagine the next step is to put the other side assembly on. Same process, just line up all the pieces. Now with these center pieces you might have to just put a little bit of pressure. Be careful because you don't want to break it, but it's like I said before, it's a tight fit, so you want it to go down as evenly as possible. Just be careful because it is wood, and while once it's built, it is very structurally sound. Each piece on its own is just a thin piece of plywood. So don't put too much pressure on it, and just be careful when you're putting everything together. Alright. So we'll start with these three side ones like I did before. On the other side. Please, whatever you do not forget the Loctite. I learned on my E4 that it is very important. I put it on most of them, but there's a couple I forgot, and I just didn't think it was that big of a deal. Well, that part started coming apart, so it's very important to use your Loctite on everything. This one might have been a little easier with the magnet, but a little too late now. I gotta tell you, I don't remember what video I saw it in, but I saw a video with the Loctite in a little water bottle cap. I don't remember where I saw it, but that was an amazing idea, and I highly recommend doing that. Just top of a regular water bottle, put some in there, and put a little piece of tape under it. Alright, again, on these middle pieces, I recommend using a magnet. I've seen people use different kind of magnets, but for me, this is what I had, and it seems to work really well. So what it talks about, there is a warning in this next step of the process to adjust these bearings to where they're pointing outward, which they are in my case. I'm going to have to get a 13mm socket to adjust them later, but that shouldn't be too much of a problem. So lay the carriage down like this, and then you're going to take the Z carriage and put it right over the middle like this. And with that, you hold the assembly while you slide the rods down. One thing I'm going to go ahead and do off camera is spray it with some dry lube, which is one thing that it recommended on the E4, and it helped out a lot. I don't see it in this one. It just helps a little bit. So I'm going to spray it with a little bit of dry lube with Teflon is what I'm using. Got it at Home Depot. Alright, so what you're going to do for this step is at the top there's a hole in there, and you're going to put this through the top hole, and what you're going to want to do is it's going to, as it's going through here, it's going to be sliding onto these. So this is the easy side, and it might get a little tricky once we do the other side. But what you're going to want to do is when you get down to these, it's going to go in here. Like I said, that's more than a half a circle, so it actually holds on to it right there. So do not, whatever you do not snap it into place. Hold this in place. You can hold it up and kind of watch. It goes through the second one, and what you do is you push it down. It goes into the hole at the bottom, and it should be flush at the top right here. All right. And then again with the other rail, do the same thing. Put it in the top, slide it through. I find it easiest to slide it through the first one so you can see it, and then move this carriage up and just push it down. You can see, you can feel it catch the other bearing. I need to, okay, so you need to roll it down a little bit before you roll it on the bearing, so it can get in that second support. And then push it through. It'll go into the bottom assembly and be flush on top. And at that point, this is how it's going to do. Now we're going to tighten it later. It's a little loose right now. That's a later step. But this is how the Z carriage, the Z assembly slides on the Y carriage. Alright, for this next part, we'll be attaching the Z stepper motor to the Z motor mount that's going to go on top of the Y carriage assembly. And this is what moves the Z axis up and down. Now, stepper motors I ordered off of Amazon because Bob's was out of them at the time. I'm not sure if he has any in now or not, but I'll include a link in the description for the stepper motors I ordered. Now, the colors are a little bit different from the ones that come from Bob, but I will get more into that later when I do the wiring of everything. I'm going to be extending the wires to the control module. It's going to be out of the enclosure, so I will go more over the wire colors at that point. Alright, so to attach the stepper motor to the Z stepper motor mount, you put it against here. Make sure the wires are going towards the skinny part of this mount. Once you set it on there, it lines up pretty easily, and you'll be using 4 of the M3x10 machine screws. They screw directly into the motor, so there's no nuts associated with this step. Just go ahead and get them started by hand, and I don't know if you need to or not, but I always tighten screws in alternating patterns, just like you tighten lug nuts on the tire of a car. It's just habit. A lot of things require it, so that's what I always do. Alright. Once you attach that, go ahead and start running the wires. And the way you do that is this hole right behind the motor. You put it through there, feed it through there, pull it through, and then it's going to go up through this hole at the back. Just like that. Alright, so the next step is going to be the Z-axis rod, which is this piece right here. It came together in my package, but you do need to take it apart because you have to put 2 washers in there. So if you take it apart, you've got this, what is it? The 626 2RS bearing right here. What it does is it goes onto the rod of the Acme rod, and then after that you're going to put 2 shim washers, and these just help protect that from the split collar, the split locking collar. So after you put the 2 washers, you're going to put the split locking collar. Alright, so to attach the split locking collar, you're going to need to use a 2.5 millimeter Allen wrench. So what you do is you hold it tight against the bearing and the washers, and you go ahead and tighten this up. Okay. So with that tight, you're going to insert the Acme rod through the hole in the rail top support. So that's in here. Put it down through this hole, and it will go. You need to screw it down, and if you see, it will end up. If you rotate it, it will pull this up, and that's the basis of how that works. All right. So the way the top of this works also is you have this what is called this bearing retainer plate, this Y3. So you'll see 3 holes around the bearing here, and these 3 holes. You want to line those up. So you put this over. Alright, now we're going to put the bearing retainer plate up here, which it goes over this. I had a little bit of trouble fitting it over the collar, but I ended up getting it to fit okay. Now, you have to put these, you're going to use 3 M16 machine screws with the bearing retainer washers. That's in one of the bags. So the easiest way I find to do this is to set the washers down over the 3 different holes, and then what you want to do is put the screws down through the holes. If you put the washer on the screw, it rubs up against the collar and is hard to get the screw through the hole. But if you put the washers down first, it seems to work okay. Now after that, you put the locking nuts on the bottom, and they're a little, there's not a whole lot of room on there. So this is another way. If you can't hold it on there, you can use the magnet, because it's a weird way to get up there. You just got to be able to. You still want to use your finger to press it up because it is a locking nut, and there's nothing else holding it. So you put it on there. All right, hold on. This is a little tricky. Okay, got that one on there. I've got one more locking nut. And so you're using the magnet to kind of hold it in place, but you're pressing up against it with your finger at the same time. Alright, and then remember again, this one's going to be the 9/32 wrench. So, and this one, I know with the E4 it was better to do it by hand, or else you're going to over tighten it and everything will get out of line. So this one I would prefer to use a screwdriver to actually tighten it down. So after you have that, you want to, what you want to do is rotate this, the Z-axis spindle, and when you pull it, if you rotate it clockwise, it pulls it up, and then if you put it down, you can, like, its own weight will take it back down, and that way you can make sure it's not interfering with any of the washers. I know before you tighten it down, it will be scraping against some of the washers, but it seems like now it is not rubbing against any of the washers once you tighten these down. Alright, so the next step in this process is the helical coupler. It's aluminum helical coupler. Let me find out. I have an Allen wrench. I want to make sure I give you the right size, though. I'll tell you the right size. Alright, so it is a 2mm Allen wrench to tighten the helical coupler. So there's two sides of it. There's a skinnier side and a thicker side. And the way this works is the thicker part goes onto the shaft, and the thinner part goes onto the stepper motor shaft. So you put the thicker part down, and on the E4, you'll see a flat part on there. On this one, there is no flat part on. Let's see. Oh, it says not to put it on here first. Apologize. So what you're going to want to do is put this on the stepper motor first. And on these, so I've read in some of the comments on these stepper motors from Amazon that the flat part needs to be machined down some more. So I don't know if it's on this one or the other axis. I'll find out. But what I do is tighten it down a little bit on this, push it to as far as it can go with the flat part, and tighten it down. I'll go ahead and tighten down this other one too. It'll go against the shaft, but it's not really doing a whole lot. It just gives it more stability. So do that part, and then after that, we need to slide the aluminum helical coupler over the shaft on here, and everything should line up. I can tell you, I just recently upgraded my E4 to a DeWalt 611, which I had to redo this whole step when I did that. And this, I can definitely tell right away, is a much stronger build. So, looking at this, let's see the best way. So when you look at this now, you can see when I lowered it onto there, it doesn't have, it's not on here far enough. So what you have to do is loosen up the set screw on the top part. And what you want to do is center it as best as you can between the two. So the flat part on here is not a problem. It might be on the other axis, but right now it is not a problem here. So you want to center it as best as you can between the two. And then go ahead and tighten all of the set screws. Alright, so after we have the helical coupler tightened between the stepper motor and the spindle, then we're going to attach this top to the sides with 4 M4 nuts and screws. Again, you can use a magnet if you want. This is one of those that it doesn't seem to be too difficult to get it together without the magnet because of the way it sits. It's fairly simple. You can put your finger in behind it, push it in, hold it with your thumb and your finger while you get the screw, the M4 screw ready to put in. Alright, so the next thing we're going to install is the Z-axis limit switch. And the way this attaches is it attaches to the left side of the front of the Y assembly. And it attaches with this, the ball of the roller of the limit switch facing out. Because the way this works is once it's mounted, the way it hits the limit is when the Z axis goes up. Let's see. When it goes up like that, right here, it hits the switch right there. So that's how you know, or that's how it knows when it's hit the limit of the upper Z-axis. All right. So the way you attach it is with two of the 2.5 millimeter by 16 machine screws and the locking nuts for it. Now it's I believe 5 millimeter nut. You need a 5 millimeter wrench for it. I couldn't find my 5 millimeter, so you can use a 13/64 wrench. That's 13/64 if you don't have a 5 millimeter wrench. So install the screws from the outside, and the nuts will go on the inside. And this part is a little tricky to get done because it's a tight space. And the magnet comes in handy if you drop something in a small space also. Alright, so I think the best way to do this, I have found out now, is to put the screw through, put the nut against it, and then try to put the screw into the nut. Now this is a smaller screw, so you want to use a smaller tip screwdriver for this one. I think a Phillips head tweaker would work perfect for this. I do have one, just not at this table. So hold it with the wrench. You can use a crescent wrench also. And this one it's not seen a lot of wear and tear, so it doesn't need to be real tight. And the instructions do say do not over tighten. So you just want to tighten it until you feel some resistance. You'll feel some resistance. It'll go into the locking part of the nut, but you don't want to over tighten it because the switch housing is plastic and you could damage it. So once you have that installed, you're going to run the wires through. And what it has you do is the same hole that the wires for the stepper motor are going down, you're going to come up through that part, and then you're going to go down through this outer part. Now, the way I'm going to extend all my wires is I'm going to get them to the central part of the gantry and then splice in all the other wires from that point. So all this part of the wire running is going to be the same for everybody. And that is the completion of the Y assembly. I'll be doing the gantry next. Once I get this video uploaded, I will get all the links in the description as I discussed. And if you have any questions, comments, please let me know. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and hope to see you on my next videos. Y'all have a good day.